We can now bring in Ted Deutch, former Democratic US Congressman and Chief Executive of the American Jewish Committee. Thank you so much for joining us here on France 24. Now, we have seen two anti-Semitic attacks in the United States in less than the span of 2 weeks. We had just this past Sunday, Boulder, Colorado. Before that, two Israeli embassy staffers gunned down outside the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington. What, in your view, is fueling this spike?
Well, we've seen anti-Semitism in the United States increasing dramatically even before October 7th, 2023, when Hamas went into Israel, slaughtered 1,200 people, took another 250 hostage. But since October 7th, we've seen this steady drumbeat of vitriolic attacks against Israel and anyone who supports Israel, the demonization of Israel, the rejection of Israel as a legitimate state. And when you have these ongoing calls to globalize the Intifada, resistance by any means necessary, it is no surprise that those calls to violence have actually led to violence, and that's what we have to address so that we don't see any more of this occurring in places where Jews gather in the United States.
Because you did in fact tweet just that this past Monday, where you said chants of globalize the Intifada and resistance by any means necessary are essentially calls to violence. The event in D.C. Was organized by your organization, the American Jewish Committee, and it was focused on bringing aid, humanitarian assistance into Gaza. Were you aware of any threats to that event itself?
No, and it's important, I'm glad you point that out, it's important to acknowledge that the subject matter for this event, for young people that brought together Jews and Muslims and Christians, Israelis and Arabs, Palestinians, was to focus on humanitarian diplomacy. It was about bringing people together. And it was at that event, immediately after that event, that this radicalized individual showed up and murdered two people outside of the Jewish Museum in our nation's capital. This can't be accepted as normal. We can't just move from one violent attack against the Jewish community to the next. We have to stand up. We've got to condemn it, and we have to say that we will not tolerate it.
Because let's not forget, in April, we also had Josh Shapiro's house, Democratic congressman's house, who was torched, essentially, by somebody who voiced support for the Palestinian cause. Is local law enforcement in the United States not doing enough? Are they not taking this threat seriously?
Local law enforcement and the federal government are both taking the threat very seriously. I don't have any doubt about that. And there are cases that are thwarted, sadly, on a regular basis. But the challenge is to acknowledge that this is not just about an individual act and another individual act and identifying those who may be considering this. It's about an atmosphere that somehow has this ridiculous idea that calls for the elimination of the state of Israel and anyone who supports Israel. This guy in Colorado wanted an end to all Zionists. He wanted all Zionists dead. Those kinds of calls do not represent a social justice movement. They represent a call to violence. And that's not just law enforcement that has a stake in this. It is everyone across society condemning it and saying that this is not acceptable. This is what leads to violence, and we will not allow any group in our society, Jews or any other group, be this threatened.
Because for a long time in the United States, there was this feeling among American Jews that they were safer compared to Jews here in Europe, who have been targeted since the 80s here in Europe. Has that changed? Has that feeling of safety changed, given that we've seen these attacks, these recent attacks?
Sure. Well, we've seen, as your report indicated, we saw the attack in Tree of Life, at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, when Jews were gathered together in prayer. We saw it in Poway, California, Jews gathered together in prayer. We saw it in Washington, Jews and others gathered together to focus on building a better world. And then we saw it in Colorado with people gathered together marching to free the hostages from the grips of the Hamas terrorists. Yes, there is this sense that the risks are greater, and it's the reason why it's so important for everyone across society to come together to combat it. As we've seen in France, and as we know around the world, And as we've known throughout our history, anti-Semitism never just impacts the Jewish community. It impacts democracy and society as a whole, which is why we all have a stake in fighting it.
We're just playing a graphic actually behind you, which shows that there's been an 893% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in the United States over the past decade. Now, the U.S. President Donald Trump says he's clamping down on anti-Semitism. We've seen how he singled out universities. He's even gone so far as to halt visa interviews for students who are headed to the United States. We've seen how he's gone after Harvard in particular. Is he helping or hurting the cause?
Well, there's no question that the fight against anti-Semitism is one that this administration is taking seriously. As we have pointed out throughout, it is essential that the administration make this a priority. It is also true that in carrying out these efforts, that due process be respected. And so we urge everyone, whether it's leaders in the United States Congress, leaders in the administration, or anyone around the world, as they engage in the fight against anti-Semitism, to not politicize it, to not make it about anything other than the necessary fight against anti-Semitism.
So do you agree with how he's going after Harvard, for instance?
Well, the approach to universities starts with the acknowledgement, as hundreds, thousands of universities have said with AJC, starts with the acknowledgement that anti-Semitism on campus across America is a significant threat, and then moving forward to combat it in ways where due process matters and where decisions aren't made that would undermine American preeminence in research. All of those considerations can and must be considered at the same time.
Because I interviewed a Pakistani student who wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post. He's a Muslim student, and he acknowledged that there is a problem with anti-Semitism on campus in Harvard, which needs to be addressed, just like there's a problem with Islamophobia, and yet foreign students are being targeted. I want to talk about how the U.S. and France can learn from each other. What measures can be put in place, do you think, to combat the rise in anti-Semitism? Because this country, too, has seen a spike in anti-Semitism since the October 7th.
Well, since October 7th, and frankly, going back before that, I mean, it's 20 years now and more here in France, and certainly a decade ago with incredible violence that we saw taking place here in France. There is a lot for us to learn from one another. It starts with the shared experiences and making sure that there's adequate security, but it's more than security. AJC, together with the Jewish community here in France, will be holding a program focused on anti-Semitism, especially focused on the youth. We need to understand how to engage one another and bring in all of our partners and allies and friends across society to stand together, not just in moments of sorrow after attacks happen, expressing condolences and the need for more security, but before they happen, standing together against the kind of language that leads to this violence. That's what we have to do together.
But language where? On things like podcasts and things like that? Is that...
Wherever there is, you hear anyone, any leader, hears language that contributes to the kind of violence that we've seen, that fuels the lies that feed into the anti-Semitic narratives, the call for the destruction of only one country in the world, and that happens to be the Jewish state, and anyone who supports that Jewish state. Yes, it doesn't matter where they come from. They need to be called out and condemned.
Now, you mentioned that we've seen a spike in anti-Semitic acts before October 7th, but of course the main spike we're seeing has happened since October 7th. 58 Israeli hostages remain inside the enclave, most of them dead, one can assume. The war continues. We know from recent polls what a majority of Israeli society want. They want this war to end. They want hostages to come home. I'm not going to ask you where you stand on Netanyahu's policy or not, but we also have Israelis within the state of Israel, politicians who have disagreed with the government in Israel, how they have handled the war, and they themselves, people who are Israelis, people who are Jews, are labeled anti-Semitic. Does this characterization not hurt the cause?
There is no question that there are strong disagreements both within Israel and across the world about the decisions made by the Israeli government, as there are disagreements about decisions made by any government. However, the difference here is that when you take this, it's not just about decisions, it's the effort to demonize the very existence of Israel, Israel's right to defend itself, ignoring and in fact obliterating the truth about what happened on October 7th. When you take all of that and you say, this is our position, and if you as Jews are supportive of Israel and its right to exist in any way, then you are the enemy, and all Zionists are the enemy, and all Zionists should be killed. That's obviously something we all need to be against.
I understand, but the thing is, we've also had criticism from within Israel. We have Israeli politicians who are Jewish, who are former members of the army, who have criticized the government, and they themselves are labeled anti-Semitic. This is why I'm just asking.
Oh, it's not anti-Semitic to be critical of decisions that are made by any government. That's not.
No, I'm just asking because it leaves foreign leaders in a tricky situation when it comes to questioning the policies of the Netanyahu government. Essentially.
Well, what should be easy for foreign leaders in politics as well as in business and education, wherever they are, what should be easy for them and what should not require any level of analysis is to stand up and to stand together when they see things that are being said that advance the kind of rhetoric that leads to violence. That's been true for leaders throughout our history. It should be no different now when those attacks are focused on Jews. That's how we protect not just the Jewish community, but it's how we protect our society as a whole.
Ted Deutch, thank you for coming in and speaking to us.
Thank you very much.